We'll do a review in Likutei Sichos in Chelek Tezvav, volume 15, the fourth Sich of the Parshas Vayishlach. The Rebbe gave this talk at a Bar Mitzvah celebration, and the Rebbe basically talks about that. Generally, we know that the Ish is the name. What a Bar Mitzvah Bachar turns 13, he becomes an Ish, as we learn out from the Pasuk, becomes a man. Basically, intellectually, he becomes a responsible, mature enough. So Ish represents the person's maturity level, the level of reaching intellectual, the capacity of being able to be responsible for Torah mitzvahs. But the Rebbe also says that we find that there's certain Maimorim, the Rebbeim would say at a Bar Mitzvah, they also use the pasuk of Nasa Odom. Odom is even a higher level. The Rebbe wants to bring the connection that while you have the level of Ish, you still also have to have the level of Odom. Odom is the level of Me'oi, the level of believable Mesiras Nefesh, and that's why in the story of Shimon and Levi, from which we learn out Ish Charbei, that the level of Ish was when the age of 13. Yet the actual act was Mesiras Nefesh, because the intellect needs to be based upon Mesiras Nefesh, as the Rebbe will explain at length in the Sikha. Let's look inside. Oh, in Pasuk, Vayichu Shnei Bnei Yaakov Shimon v'Levi Achidina Ish Charbei. So the Pasuk talks about after they violated Dino, so the two sons of Yaakov, Shimon and Levi, they took action. Each one, the brothers of Dina, each one took their sword, etc. As Pasuk continues there to tell the story how they killed the entire city of Shechem after they got him to circumcise themselves. So then they went and they killed all of the people of the city. So Zog Chazal, our sage of blessed memory, says, "As a Zain and Dan given 13 year alt," that they were both 13 years old. So even the younger one, that means, as the Gemara proves over there, that even Levi was 13 years old. The fact that the Torah calls him an Ish when the age was 13, so that means when by 13, from them lernt men up, from them lernt men arois, and from this we learn out, then din from ben shlesh esrei mitzvah is the law that once you turn 13, you are already an Ish, and call you an Ish then, and that means, and they were the age of 13, so we know that when you're 13, you are obligated in mitzvahs. The connection is Vibal to Yud Gimel Shana Vertman angerufen Ish, just like in that case by Shimon and Levi, they were referred to Veikach Ish, they were called already a man, and Anga was only just 13 years old. So that shows, that points to the fact that when you're 13, you're becoming an Ish, you become a man. What do they say? What is a man when you say a man? Man represents maturity, greatness, plus vice of godless, that shows greatness, adulthood that you became. The state, as the Pasuk states, when they were complaining to Dosav Aviram, they were complaining to Moshe when he tried to rebuke them. They say to them, "Misam choli ish gomer." Who made you into a man? Man would show that, a person is somebody that we have to listen to. So the word ish represents maturity, and the same thing is. And the same thing is, it says you will be strengthened and you'll become a man. So over there too, we see that that's the level of man represents being strong, adulthood. So this haste, that means as to Gimel Shono, that when you reach 13 years old, the gerechter to the Meile von der Wachsenen, that you reach the advantage of an adult. Once you're 13, you're an Ish, so as the Pasuk says, and for Nagodl in Seichel and Deya, so you become an adult, you become big also in your brains, Seichel, in your intellect, and also in your knowledge. 13 That is the age. You become mature, you become an adult. And because you have that level of maturity, you become an adult at the age of 13. That's why you become obligated in all the mitzvahs. So now, doesn't mean that you have to wait. Some children are smart and even before the age of 13, but the true responsibility and really appreciating whether it's whatever to appreciate, whether it's money, whether it's uh, other things. It's at the age of you might know about it, you might understand at a younger age, but the real appreciation to understand what a mitzvah is and what the lack of a mitzvah is, you don't really get it until you're 13. That's why the age is 13, as it ever continues. Although there might be a case as Zain that he should be somebody with understanding intellectually also before reaching 13 years old. Von deswegen, and yet, wie bald ihm fällt die Schleimus Hadas Vahergesh, since he is lacking the wholesomeness of the level of das, of understanding and sensitivity and hergish and feeling. And hat noch nicht the Hakodev Hargosha. He doesn't have yet that recognition, that feeling. Sayin der Tayerkeit umayla von Kiyum mitzvah, whether it is the preciousness and the greatness of observing a mitzvahs. He doesn't really fully get it. Say in the Mchisorn and Heterakim Zeirun, he also doesn't really fully appreciate the lacking and what do you miss out when you don't do the mitzvahs. So in Heterakim Zeir, when you don't do them, the mitzvahs, he doesn't appreciate it yet fully. So you might know it, but it's not in a way of das and argosh. You don't fully know it. You also bring the example from worldly matters. Even when we're talking about a minor who before the age of 13 versteht good the Meile from Mammon and Gedula. Let's say he understands pretty well, he has in his mind what the advantage of money or greatness from deswegen, but yet the true idea of money and greatness is still distant from him. It's far from him. Is noch weit von zu haben in Zeh. He's still far away to have in them an emissary, Hakodah and Hergish, to have a true recognition, a true feeling for it. So he may know it, but he's lacking that special feeling. It's also the other side, the opposite of wealth and greatness. In the heaven in Shiflus Vidalus, not really fully appreciation of people who are low and people who are poor. As although he does understand their lacking, is as by him nit by a godel, but it's still not at the same level as by an adult who really gets it. Who feels very well the lacking of that shiflus and dalus. The riber is a nit verantwortlich for seine Meisim und Anhogen. Therefore, he is not responsible. The child under 13, even if he understands, but he's still not responsible for his actions and for his conduct. So you cannot put upon him the obligation of mitzvahs. He's not yet at that level, even though he may understand it, but he's not yet at the level to really fully appreciate it. So this explained very well why it's important to be an ish, important to be mature enough, to be at the level intellectually and feeling appreciation for mitzvahs and lack of there. But we also find that there is even more to a bar mitzvah boy, where it reaches the level of Odom, which is a higher level. And that's why we find in the Maimorim that the Rebbe spoke about a bar mitzvah, they also brought in the pasuk of Nasa Odom. So why is that necessary? That's what the discussion is going to revolve around now. Beis, Rabbi Seinu Nesienu, our Rebbes, our leaders, by Chagigas bar mitzvah. So many times during a celebration of a bar mitzvah, they said a discourse that began with the verse let us make an Odom. Hashem saying, let's make man. So the fact that they gave a discourse and they gave a talk on the Pasuk Nasa Odom is davon verstandig. So with this, we can understand as the inyan von a bar mitzvah hot hashayches, that the idea of a bar mitzvah also has a connection to the madrege von Odom, also to the level, the step of an Odom. Was is a hechere madrege vider toyar ish? That is a higher level, higher step than the description of man. As explained in many places, with regards to the four names that a person can be called. So a human being is called either Adam, which is the highest level, then next to that is Ish, and next lower than that is Gever, and the least is Emish. So the highest level is Adam, as the Hechster from the Alle Nemen. The highest of all these names is their Shem. Adam is the name Adam. Was weist auf sein Schleimes. That points to the person's wholesomeness, a person who is an Adam. That's more than an Ish, is the Mughal. So it's not understood. Since for the obligation to be obligated in mitzvahs by a 13-year-old is genug de madrege von Ish, it's sufficient. The level of Ish, the level of man, that's sufficient. Farvos verbinden the meaning from bar mitzvah euch mit madrege von Odom. So why do we connect and we tie bar mitzvah also to the level of Odom? Nasa Odom, they said the Maimer, so we're connecting it also to Odom. If Ish is sufficient, why connect it also to Odom? So what is the difference between Odom? What is Odom more specifically? Gimel. Der Unterschied zwischen Ish und Odom, the difference between Ish, the description, and Odom is der Toyar Ish, the description Ish, bezieht sich zu der Darge von Seichel, was ist shaykh to me. That refers to the level of intellect that is associated to the emotion. It's the intellectual part as it connects to the feeling of the heart. There's also many level steps, how much connection the intellect has to the emotion. These as the shleimus from the darge, the wholesomeness of the darges of Ish as the intellect matures more and more, that comes when he turns 20. So that is the level of Ish. Ish is intellect as it's associated to the emotions. But the description of Odom, or the Toyar Odom, the description of Odom, if their Meile von Seichel, that points to, that shows on the advantage of the intellect, was his Hecher von sein Shaykh to Midas. That is higher, which is higher than being connected to the Midas. It's the intellect in its own. So, according to this, it's even more difficult to understand why associate an Odom with a bar mitzvah, which the point is to associate it with the emotions and with the actual observance of Torah mitzvahs. According to this, it's even more difficult. That Zusammenhang now, the association that we said before from Nasa Odom with bar mitzvah. They said, let's make Odom with a bar mitzvah. Wie kann man verbinden the Meile von Odom? How can you tie and connect the advantage of an Odom mit einem, was is erst alt geworden 13 years, somebody who just turned 13? This seems to be beyond this. So, muss man sagen, therefore, we need to say, as the Kavana dabei is, that what is the intention over here, what we are out to say here as Chotch, in Yoni von Bar Mitzvah is was Verta Ishkinal, even though the main, what is the aspect of the person that here he is a man, that's enough. That's really the main thing that we're trying to say by a bar mitzvah is an ish. But yet, from deswegen, but yet, by kiyum ha-mitzvahs muzman onkumen euch zu der hashpoah von darkes Odom. When you're observing mitzvahs, we also need to come on to that influence of the level of the Odom that is in the person. So while the main thing is the ish, but we still need an influence from the level of Odom. And then I was going to say, matter of fact, from the posik that we learn, and there's two ways of learning. As we said, whether it's halacha l'moshe Sinai or it's from the posik, but still, the act that took place over there was something which was beyond the intellect. They took their sword, and they were ready from Sidus Nefesh to take on the city of Shechem. Now, the mocker from them, as in it must be the Dargah von Ish. Where do we have a source that the level of Ish isn't sufficient? Is from the pasuk itself, from what they did over there. Is from the pasuk that says they took each one his sword. Gufa. But is shver. It would seem at first it seems difficult. The chidush was kum zu by and Yud Gimel Shana. What is the novelty? What special happens when you turn 13? Was to leave in verter mechuyev mitzvahs, that what takes place, that is what brings the person to be obligated to mitzvahs. Is doch nit in midas nor in seichel und das hashayich midas. Is not the fact. It's not an emotional thing. About mitzvah is not that you mature emotionally, but it is intellectually become, as we said before, responsible, mature enough, and as it connects the intellect to the midos, that's the level of ish. Dos v'serverta bardas, that he becomes somebody with understanding. Was his roy to verstehen, he is fit to understand the memela, and because he's fit to really to get it. So therefore, he can take upon himself the yoke and the responsibility of Torah mitzvahs. So since that's what the main thing of a bar mitzvah is, to maturity ish, to do the mitzvahs, so how come the story that we read over there was actually an emotional story about killing all the people of Shechem, taking their sword? How can you learn this from the verse that each one of Shimon and Levi, each one took his sword and they killed all males, and that's the source that they were an ish, so that they're a man, to tell us that that's the maturity level. Was that Teuchen is Apu'ula? So what does the pasuk talk about? They did an act. What was the act? They took and they killed. That comes from the force of the emotions. It's not an intellectual consideration. It's a force of the emotion. But here we're talking about the maturity level of 13, means that you get responsible, that it's an advantage of the intellect over the emotion. Here we have an emotional outburst over here, would seem. So from this it's understood. That's how we learn from this pasuk itself that ish is not enough, that intellectual consideration is not enough. The full mashmas, that that the contents of the verse, the fact that they took and they killed, that contains within it an advantage, was is nit muchrach in dargas ish. It's not, doesn't have to be in the level of ish. No, durch ir ver di darge b'shlemusa. So you don't have to be vayikhu vayargu in order to become an ish. There's an ish, but the completion, the full ish, is when it brings durch ir ver di darge b'shlemusa. That through this that level of ish becomes b'shleimus. And the river kemen aro Islam from the pasuk, and that's why we learn from the pasuk. Nit nor as ben yud gimel mitzvahs. It's not only when you do 13 mitzvahs, but it is a ish stam. He's just an ish nor oich as Dargis ishtam is the genug. So now we're actually telling you that it's not just enough to be a man. A man is enough to be 13 years old in the level of maturity. But in order to be a wholesome man, a real man, you also have to vayargu. Memuz euch onkommen zu der Meile, was in Ruben ist, and you also must come to that advantage which is hinted in Vayikhu and Vayargu. The meat, so the meat is euch verstandig. So with this, we also understand. Why did our Rebbes, our leaders, at the celebration of Bar Mitzvah say, let's make man, Hagam, as the clothes they get in from a ben Gimel mitzvahs. General idea of a 13 of mitzvahs is mitzadem was done, Vertmana Ishu Bardaskinal, then you become a man and a person who is mature in his mind, the bardas, and that's the ish part. But from deswegen, but yet it does only need genug. That is not sufficient. Muss euch ankommen. We also have to come onto the hashpoah from Eifan Avodah to the flow and the style of service for Nasa Odom. We need to come on to also Odom. Also, let's make a man. Because he's bedoimet to the Avodah. That is similar to the service from the Yichugam Kidlakamon of taking that soil that we'll say later on. That's a necessary. We'll learn that out from that same pasuk over there. The additional to being an ish at 13 in action, when there is a maturity level, there's also the level of a yichud. So in Ois Hay, in Ois Hay, the Rebbe will continue to bring down the two opinions from where we learn out that ben shleisha sedei lemitzvos, that you become mechuyev when you're 13-year-old. One is from the pasuk, but there's also another opinion that it's halacha l'moshe misene, which means that one of them is a logical, a natural. The other one is halacha l'moshe misene. This is sort of accepting. This is the two aspects, as the Rebbe will bring out, that are required by a bar mitzvah to be an ish, but also to have this extra in avodas Hashem, as the Rebbe explains. Let's look inside. Hey, Rabbi Rubazeh. So what's the explanation in this? Benegeya the Mokir Hadin from Ben Yudgimul Lemitzvahs gefindt man zwei Deis. As far as the source for the halacha, where do we know that when you're 13-year-old you are mechuyev in mitzvahs? There are two opinions. Aleph, number one, kinal, as before, as we learned that we learned it, derived this from our verse. That's the number one. And number two, base, the other opinion is this is einer von the shiurim vazainen halacha l'moshe misina. This is like one of the other measurements, which are a rule that were given to Moshe from Sinai, meaning that's a tradition from Hashem, passed along from Moshe Rabbeinu, that this is the age which you become bar mitzvah, just as the other all shiurim that we have in the Torah. What's the difference between the two? Is it a natural, which would apply to a non-Jew, or it's only a halacha, which applies only to a Jew? What's the difference between these two places where we learn it from? According to the first opinion, is as to leave them shinu hateva, that the reason what happens at the age of 13 is a change in nature. As is the teva for Ibn Odom, so is the nature of majority of the people. That when you turn 13 years old, you become an adult in your mind, in your understanding, your das. So that's a natural phenomenon. Like the Tzviter Day, but according to the second opinion, is as halacha dikir din. That is a law that is halacha tells us when the shiurim halacha Moshe Sinai. That's the measuring all shiurim that are by Moshe given as a law from Moshe Sinai. When it's mitzadim shinu hateva, it's not because of the change of nature. That's the law the way Hashem established. Nafkamina halacha. What halachic difference would there be of the two opinions? When Bnei Noach mechuyev b'kiyum hamitzvos, so ze seinen mechuyev. When do Bnei Noach, non-Jews, who are also commanded in their 7 Noachad commands, at what age are they mechuyev in the mitzvahs? According to Loider Halef, according to the first opinion, as the Tam from Ben Yud Gimel mitzvahs is mitzat teva bnei odom, that the reason why we do 13 years for mitzvahs is because that's the nature, is that Elter Vid Gimel Shona Mechayiv. So then when one turns 13, this necessitates that also a non-Jew, Oich Bnei Noach, also Bnei Noach, in dem Kiyum von Zeira mitzvahs, in the observance of their mitzvahs, because since we're talking about a natural phenomenon, so that applies to a Bnei Noach equally to a Yid, and therefore at the age of 13, that's when they're mechuyev in their mitzvahs. Mashenkin loider under them, as opposed to the other opinion, which it's a halachic shir, as the klal from Ben Yud Gimel mitzvahs is halacha l'Moshe Sinai. That this rule that 13 years mitzvahs is by halacha l'Moshe Sinai is verstandig. It's understood as by Bnei Noach was zei to zei nit mashurim, that when we talk about Bnei Noach who were not given to them, these measures were not given. Is the godless tluya by yedin einem? So over there, their greatness hinges by each one loid zayin seichel v'das. V'tzad zayin tchunativis. Over there, it depends on each one according to their understanding and their level of das, the way it's their natural characteristic, their trait. So therefore, we don't have a rule. It's not always 13. It depends on each one according to where they're standing for them to be obligated in their mitzvahs. So what are these two ideas in the service of Hashem? One opinion is a service of Hashem based on nature, because that's the teva, that's the 13. The other one is based on halacha l'Moshe Sinai. Both. The Dermonta Tzvei Deis Ba'avedus Odom, the two above mentioned opinions, how do we interpret it when it comes to the service of a person? And it's Tzvei Fanim, in them say that those are two ways in the order how the beginning of the service of a Yid should be. When you become a mitzvah, you start your avodah. So a Jew's avodah, how do you start it? In Kiyum HaTorah mitzvahs, in the fulfillment and observance of Torah mitzvahs. What's the approach, how to go ahead of it? The Day Rishona, according to the first opinion, is as an oifun shel avodah al pitam vadas. It's a type of a service which is based on reason and logic and das. This haste, that means vibald as zayin chiyuv to mekayim zayin mitzvahs. Since his obligation to fulfill mitzvahs is abhängig, it hinges on tevash, in tevash lemus haseichel v'das, in the natural wholesomeness of the seichel and das, as when erhotaha kore, that when he has a recognition and a feeling on hargoshe in mitzvahs, when he can feel it and he has a recognition, then you put upon him the yoke of mitzvahs. So if that is the approach, that's the beginning, that's the opinion that says we're looking at his natural state, is verstandig as der onik von seiner avodah. Over there, it's understood that how you start your service is in an oifun von tam v'das, is in a way of reason and knowledge. Intellectually, it's a natural way. Later, however, according to the second opinion, is those was ben Yud Gimel Shona mus mekabel zayin of zir the male mitzvahs. The fact that a 13-year-old needs to accept upon himself the yoke of mitzvahs is as halacha l'Moshe Misen. It's a law. It's not natural. It's a law. Therefore, v'sazoi is der tzivah kodesh baruch Hu. That is what is the command of Hashem. So therefore, it turns out because of that, azayin sugain, that his approach to kima mitzvahs, that to observance of mitzvahs is leighton seder ha'avodah from Kabbalah, so it comes according to the order of the service of accepting the yoke. If, according to the opinion that it's a natural, that means the approach is a natural approach to the observance of Torah mitzvahs. If the reason for 13-year-old is because it's halacha l'moshe misinai, then the approach is based on accepting the yoke. Now, even according to the first opinion that it is natural, it also cannot negate also having Kabbalah soil, Zion. But also according to the first opinion, from the fact that it says that each one they took each one was a man, they took this sword, Levant and Aris. That from there we learn out as that's Cholas Havoidim and Yud Gimel mitzvahs. That the beginning of this service when you start turn 13 is Apitam Badas based on reason and knowledge, which means the natural from deswegen and yet from them gufa was learned from posix. On the fact itself that where do we arrive this from a verse which it says by taking the sword. So while it's a natural, but yet what did they do there? They took a sword, apula from Mesiras Nefesh. It was an act from self-sacrifice. Is muchach, it's evident as euch loy der deya, that even according to this opinion, is that inyan from kiyum mitzvahs verbunden mit der avodah from Mesiras Nefesh. So the concept of observance of mitzvahs is tied to the service of self-sacrifice, shalomaylim and haseichel, which is beyond seichel. So while we're learning it from a pasuk, and we're learning it from the natural ish that you turn into a v'chazakta v'yisolish, the idea of misamchalish, which is a expression of maturity, a natural maturity, but yet it tells us in a story in which there was Mesiras Nefesh involved. That means that even according to that opinion, it has to be with the service of beyond seichel. Und kisi is kein stiren nit la mevurli il. And this does not contradict, this is not in contradiction to that which we explained earlier. As loy der day is as anaveda shapi seichel v'das, that according to this opinion, it's a service which is based according to the logic and knowledge, seichel and das. So how are we saying now all of a sudden it's karba, it's Mesiras Nefesh higher than seichel? While hagavas the etzem ha'avodah, because although the actual essence of the work needs to be done, it needs to be done with recognition, with grasping in the inyan from Torah mitzvahs, in the concept of Torah mitzvahs, from deswegen, and yet the basis of the service is specifically accepting the yoke, which is beyond the reason and understanding. The basis, what you're doing is logical. You're doing the mitzvahs in a seichelic way, and you're recognizing, you're appreciating it, and you're an ish, but yet the basis for it has to be the Kabbalah soil. But nor then the Yisoid is Kabbalah soil, because it's only when the Yisoid is accepting the yoke, can the avodah from kima mitzvahs mitahasoge zayin bis to darsu zayin. Then the service of observing the mitzvahs with understanding can be properly as it should, only if it's based upon the foundation of Kabbalah soil of accepting the yoke. And we have proof for that, and from the pasuk, and from the Echoches dazu, evidence that even when you logical dictates, the Torah tells you that you have to also be based on the basis of Kabbalah soil. One of the proofs of this is the Azhoris HaKlolius of Kima mitzvahs, Torah mitzvahs. The general Torah warnings when the Torah gives on observance of Torah mitzvahs in general. So the pasuk talks about shtei to the ein of sati lefanecho hayoim esachayim besatoim ubacharto b'chayim. So the pasuk says, listen, I've given you today, see that I've given you today, life and good, choose life. So it would seem that after the Eibishter tells you this is life and this is good, why does he have to tell you further to choose it? It's obvious already. Once it would seem that since the person already sees with the eyes of his intellect, As der derech ha-Torah mitzvahs is chaim v'toiv, that the pathway of Torah and mitzvahs is life and is good. So why does he have to be again further instructed as that he should choose life? It is good. That's what he sees of it. If that's chaim and toiv, why does he have to choose it? Nor the beer was that. What's the explanation of this? If the bechira for the mention in Torah mitzvahs, if the choosing of the person to Torah mitzvahs is going to be based nor of sein seichel havana v'yidiyah, entirely only on his intellect, his understanding, and what he knows as his einachayim v'toiv, that this is life and good. If that's the entire basis, he says there mit noch in oived havaya, so that does not make him yet into a servant of Hashem. He's not serving Hashem because that part he's doing because that's good. But to serve Hashem for avodas Hashem is that serving Hashem needs to be like a servant serves the master. Everything that the servant, the slave does, it does mitzadem oil was ein odin hatufim areglet. It's all based on the yoke that was placed upon him by his master. And that's why even after you see that there is Chaim and Toiv, the Torah says, Bacharto, you have to do so choose that because Hashem tells you that, accept the yoke. The far dav the Bechiras Ha'odom in Torah mitzvahs. That's why when a person chooses Torah mitzvahs, that needs to be Mitzadem Tzivu HaKodesh Baruch Hu. That is because of the command of Hashem, Ubacharto B'chai. Choose life. So why don't we just say choose life and do it as an Oved Eved, and we don't need to tell you that it's good. Just do it because Hashem tells you. No. The Eberster wants you to be totally involved in it. At first, you have to see that it's Chaim and Toiv. Nor Fardem is their Pasuk Magdim. Before this, the Pasuk introduces Reino Sati Gomer. See, I've given. Un euch in dem Tzivui or Bacharto, not only in the beginning, but even when there's a Bacharto, just say Bacharto Torah Mitzvahs. It says Bachayim. In dem Pasuk Madish Bacharto Bachayim. While der Eberster will, because Hashem wants as the Inyan HaTorah Mitzvahs, that this idea of Torah Mitzvahs, so durchdringen the ganze Mitzvahs, you mentioned that should penetrate the entire existence of the human being. Und der Liber muss euch sein Seichel banemen und margisch sein, and therefore also his intellect must accept and feel as Torah mitzvahs and Chaim v'toiv, that Torah mitzvahs are life and good. So it's important to include and that it encompasses your entire being, not just doing, accepting, but you should be in it. It should be life and it should be appreciated also, so your entire being is involved in it. Your intellect, your emotion, because you appreciate that it's just Chaim and Toiv, not just doing it, but it has to be based on the Kabbalah. Now, so based on all this, so now we'll understand the Sheikhs from our Bar Mitzvah mit Nasa Odom, the connection from our Bar Mitzvah with description that the Maimorim began, let's make a man that is also a man. In the Bir von Toyer Odom, in explaining the description, when we describe what is Odom, in Yonim, we find two aspects. Aleph, number one, Tachlis Hashlemus from Bechina Seichel, the ultimate wholesomeness from the level of intellect. Odom is the ultimate in Seichel. Kinal Sid Gimel, as we said earlier, Sid Gimel, it is a Seichel, Odom, which is higher than Midas. Ish is the Seichel, as it is the Shlemus of the Midas. But the level of independently Seichel is Odom, as said earlier. But Beis, Odom is Oisiyos Ma'od. Odom also has the same letters as the word Ma'od. Like V'havtas Hashem Elokecha B'chol Ma'odcha, level Ma'od. Ma'od means very Bechinas B'li Gvul. That is a level of limitless, without any boundaries. But it's Hecher from Seichel, which is beyond the intellect. Und die Bechine in the mentioned Dritzich Ois, in them was is amedaber. That aspect, that bligvul, expresses itself in the Adam in the fact that he can speak. Warum sein koyach hadibur kommt, because the power for a person to speak comes from the bligvul shebenefesh, from the limitless, the non boundaries that are in the soul, was his hercher for milus hasechel. That's even higher than the advantage of sechel. That's in a limited way. And wie bald das beide Yonim seine merubes in demselben Teuer, since both of these aspects are hinted in the same description, Odom as the ultimate in Seichel, and also in the level of Ligvul. That man Zogen, we need to say, as Yahweh Mashayches einer zum Zweiten, zum anderen. They are connected one to the other, this ultimate Seichel with the Ligvul. So we can explain this in the service of man. When der Mensch kommt zu Tachlis Hashlemis and Seichel, also when a person reaches the ultimate goal in intellect, in the level of seichel of human, was his hecher from seichel von ish, that even which is higher than the seichel of ish. So he's in the ultimate seichel. It's the seichel of Adam, the highest muzar onkumen to mesiras nefesh alamaylam haseichel. Still, he needs to come on to mesiras nefesh, even that is higher than seichel. And also on the other hand, even when the power of Mesiras Nefesh, which is beyond Seichel, is shines by him and lights by him, he realizes that he should not be satisfied, but he needs to put an effort as the Mesiras Nefesh will durchdringen, that self-sacrifice should penetrate, should go through also his inner powers. As we learned earlier in Simches, the beginning and the start is the power of Seichel. Das is einer from the Remozim in them, and this is one of the hints in the fact, was the Maimer, that at the mitzvah they said this, Maimer Nasa Odom to Weisen, they also said Odom to show, as euch wenn mit der Greich zu Meilus Hasechel va'adas, even when you reach the level, the greatness of intellect, das hashayachim lemidas, which are connected to midas, was damod verter gerufna ish, that's when he's called an ish, a man. At that point, he says nit genug, it's not enough. When a daf noch out onkommen to the Ravida, he still needs to come on to that service from ish charbe goymer, from a man. Each man takes a sword. The Ligvul, Mesiras Nefesh, Avedis of Mesiras Nefesh, the service Mesiras Nefesh, Alamaylam Hasechel, which is beyond intellect. This is verbunden mit Bchinas Adam, that is connected with the level of Adam, Nasa Adam, the level of the letters of Me'ed, which is level of Ligvul. That was the hint of the Maimorim being said of Nasa Adam, to know that even at the time of an Ish, when it's the ultimate of Ish, that it reaches the maturity level, still needs to go to the level of Adam, and that's why in the Pasuk there is which is also the level of Mesiras Nefesh. The same as by Adam, you have the Adam, the intellect on the highest level, even higher than Ish, and at the same time it's also Me'ed, to show that we need them both together. And that's the expectation of the Ascholos Avodah, to have the basis both on the intellect as well as the level of L'maylam intellect in the level of This is Mesichas Tammuz Tavshin Yud Aleph B'Chagigas Bar Mitzvah.